Destructor.
The name itself seems sinister, and the tiny mite it describes strikes fear in the hearts of many beekeepers. For over 30 years, this tiny mite has been attacking bees in the United States. But are conventional efforts to fight this mite helping or making the problem worse? The Varroa mite is native to Asia, and it originally affected the Asian honeybee, or Apis cerana. The mite started affecting the European honeybee, Apis mellifera, and started moving around the world in the 1960s. In 1987, the first mites were observed in the United States. Varroa breeds on developing honeybees in the pupa stage, and it attaches itself to adult honeybees and feeds on their fat bodies. The mites carry and transfer multiple viruses, including deformed wing virus, which affects the bee's ability to fly. Apis mellifera, having had no prior exposure to the mites, had no natural defenses against it. About 90% of the colonies which were infected with the mites would die. With this grim outlook, beekeepers began looking for any possible way to fight the mites, particularly in the form of treatments. The problem with treatments, though, is that they tend to breed stronger pathogens. An early treatment was fluvalinate, which killed about 95% of mites. But the problem was that 5% that survived would breed, and eventually the population at large was immune to the treatment. Fluvalinate was followed by Coumaphos, to which the mites eventually also developed resistance. Besides developing stronger mites, these treatments can also have a negative impact on the bees. Coumaphos, for example, was linked with neurological disorders in the bees and could be a contributing factor to colony collapse. Now beekeepers use different chemicals, both organic and synthetic. But eventually those are going to lose their effectiveness, as the mites which survive the treatment reproduce and make stronger mites. I've seen multiple beekeepers lately in online forums reporting that they've treated their hives in the fall with several different treatments, and yet it seemed to have little impact on their mite counts. Are we reaching a point where current treatments are becoming ineffective? Beekeepers in the US have been treating their hives for over 30 years, and yet mites are still just as much of a problem in those hives. Meanwhile, feral colonies of honeybees collapsed during the 90s and have recovered to their pre-Varroa populations. In fact, studies have shown that those colonies, even though they're generally infected with Varroa, have the same summer and winter survival rates as they did before Varroa. Dr. Thomas Seeley's observations suggest that, left to natural selection, honeybees in a given area will develop resistance to Varroa in about 4 years. There are initial significant losses, but eventually those bees that have traits to help them fight Varroa will recover and reproduce. These traits are either hygienic behavior, which is when bees remove infected pupa from the hive, or grooming behavior, in which adult bees remove the mites from other adult bees. Maybe then our best response to Varroa is to stop breeding resistant mites and start raising mite-resistant bees. Are you ready to go treatment-free in 2023? In the US in the 1990s, breeding for Varroa resistance would have meant taking heavy losses and then breeding from your survivor stock to develop colonies with better genetics. But now there are two main sources you can go to for bees that will generally already have those Varroa resistant traits. One is to trap feral colonies using swarm traps. The other is to obtain bees from breeders who have already taken those losses to develop strains of bees with Varroa resistance. One example of those is weaver bees in Texas. One way to almost guarantee heavy losses if you decide to go treatment-free is to just stop treating colonies that don't have any particular Varroa resistance. I've had people tell me that they know that treatment-free doesn't work because they bought a couple packages, put them in their hives, didn't treat them, and by the end of the year, those colonies had gotten Varroa mites and died. And that's not surprising. Treatment-free beekeeping is not about just not treating, but it's about raising bees that have the traits to be able to manage Varroa on their own. So how can you convert to treatment-free? Well, I have a few items that you could consider if you're wanting to switch over your current hives or start out with new hives and not treat. First, if you have existing hives, you can requeen those hives with queens with Varroa resistant traits. Those queens could be VSH or Varroa sensitive hygienic, or they could just be from survivor stock from a treatment-free provider. The Be Mindful website provides a resource which indicates treatment-free providers around the country. And I'll put a link to that resource in the description. The second thing is don't buy packages or nucleus colonies from conventional treating providers. Instead, catch swarms or get your bees from treatment-free providers. Now, a caught swarm is not a guarantee. It could be from a feral colony, or it could be a cast-off from a nearby beekeeper. Considering the cost, it's a risk worth taking. Third, be willing to accept some losses. Treatment-free beekeepers lose bees just like treating beekeepers do. But the difference is perspective. It's typical that a beekeeper will purchase a package or a nucleus and will then do everything they can to protect their investment by keeping that colony alive. For a treatment-free beekeeper, the loss of a colony can be the loss of weaker genetics, strengthening the overall gene pool, and more specifically, the gene pool within your own apiary. Fourth, understand that you don't have to manage everything. A question that gets asked a lot is, so if you don't treat for Varroa mites, what do you do to control Varroa mites? My answer is nothing. What the treatment-free beekeeper strives for is to have bees that will manage Varroa on their own through hygienic or grooming behavior. And fifth, let nature work. Part of allowing the bees to manage Varroa on their own is allowing the colony to go through growth periods during strong nectar flow and die back or go through brood breaks during dearth. Those brood breaks, which naturally occur during dearth, provide a time when the Varroa mite can't breed as well because there's less brood on which to reproduce. But this only happens if the beekeeper doesn't feed during those periods, instead leaving enough honey for the bees to get through those times naturally. This also works best if you have bees that are acclimated to your local climate and nectar flows. So your emphasis in selecting bees for treatment-free should be more on the survivability and local adaptation of the bees, and less on the bees' temperament and brood production. I started my apiary with one feral colony from a trap out. I made splits from that colony, caught another colony that was in a fallen tree, and was gifted a nucleus to end that first year with 6 colonies. Over the winter, one of those died out, but 5 survived. From those 5 colonies, my apiary went up and down throughout the year, but I ended the year with 8 colonies. Now today, the temperature is in the mid-50s, and most of my colonies are still flying. We still have a couple months to get through until spring, and a lot can happen between now and then, but so far they seem pretty healthy. I've never paid for a colony, and I don't worry about Varroa mites. Despite warnings about feral bees, my bees have been pretty gentle to work with. If you live in an area with Africanized bees, your mileage may vary. Beekeepers won't move past concerns about Varroa until we stop buying, selling, and keeping bees with little resistance to the mites. 30 years ago, it was thought that Apis mellifera couldn't develop natural resistance, but now we know better. Maybe now is a good time to get off the treatment treadmill. If you want more information about getting free bees by catching honeybee swarms, check out this video right here. Otherwise, I encourage you to watch this video that Google thinks you'll really like. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.